Hello everyone and welcome to RTL Today, where this morning we've got a large topic to talk about. It's about Israel and Palestine and the hope for peace there. Joining me, I'm very happy to welcome Meron Rapaport, one of the founders of A Land for All, 2 states, 1 homeland. Meron, you've been a journalist all of your working life, an award-winning journalist, moving from the biggest newspapers in Israel to citizen journalism. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And also joining us is Dr. Thabet Abu Ras, co-executive director of the Abraham Initiatives, which strives for full and equal citizenship of Israel's Jewish and Arab citizens. Dr. Thabet, you have a background in academia. You yourself were a professor in various universities, and your actual specialism is geography. You're an expert in land and planning, which is something of immense interest when we think about the land of Israel and Palestine combined. Now, just to open up, please, Meron, could you tell us about the origins of A Land for All, 2 states, 1 homeland?
The origin is a group of Israelis and Palestinians about 6 or 7 years ago that realized that the current way in which the peace process is going will lead us nowhere. That the current negotiations, current peace process started in Oslo in '93, based on separation between Israelis and Palestinians, as if this is the solution. We are here and they are there, and it doesn't matter who is they and who is we, that it will solve the issue, that there will be no frictions between Israel and Palestinians, and therefore there will be no war and there will be peace. We realized 6 or 7 years ago that this does not correspond, first of all, to reality, to the mental reality that both Israelis and Palestinians feel a great attachment to the whole of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, once. And secondly, that we are already mixed, Israelis, Jews and Palestinians all over the land. So therefore, this attitude of separation is, first of all, unrealistic. It doesn't correspond to reality. And secondly, and maybe it's more important, it is undesired. It is undesired because as a goal, it's a negative goal, separation, divorce, and not living together and sharing.
Dr. Thabet, just coming to that point, as Meron just said, there are many examples within Israel. We can think of the old city in Jerusalem, which is a place impossible to divide, many would say. Currently, I think about 50,000 people live in 1 square kilometer, and it's a mix of people, a mix of Christians, Jewish people, Arab people, all together. Other examples also across the country in Haifa and Galilee, for example. Now, with your academic background as a geographer, an expert in land planning, how do you see this land for all working from a geographical perspective?
Well, from our experience, we know there are several places around the world that even smaller in terms of geographical areas with more people, and still they live together in peace. What we need here just to realize that people are all equal and they are entitled to the same rights in the same geographical area. This is not the situation today. Unfortunately, nowadays we are facing 3 different challenges. One challenge, it's the COVID-19 challenge, and then there is also a challenge of making Israel, we are passing a process of Judaization of the homeland, make it more Jewish on the expense of its democratic values. And the third challenge, trying to annex more territories, more Palestinian territories, and to annex it to Israel. Well, just to remind all of us, this area used to be known as Palestine 72 years ago. And now it's controlled, most of the area, all of the areas, really controlled by Israeli military forces or by Israeli government. So we are actually suggesting, our vision is suggesting to give a hope for both people, both nations, for Palestinians and for Israelis. We treating the people who are living in the homeland, in this geographical territory, regardless of the mix. Yes, you are right, it's mixed everywhere. It's in Galilee, where even 50% of the total population are Palestinians, 50% Jews. In the Negev area, in the southern part of Israel, 1/3 of the population are Arab Muslims, and the same thing in the West Bank. Well, 90% of the people of the West Bank are, even over 90% are Palestinian. But we have to arrange this homeland. We have to agree in the principle of the people, two peoples, the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right of self-determination. They have the right to their own independent and sovereign states. Okay, Israel, and besides Israel, Palestine. And they must have a good relations. We are talking about two states with a democratic regimes, okay, even multi-party systems, free movement between the two states, every Jew entitled to live wherever he wants in the homeland, okay? When I'm talking again about the homeland, I'm talking about the area, geographical area between the Jordanian River and the Mediterranean. The same thing with the Palestinians. The Palestinians have the right, exactly like the Jews, to live in the homeland, all of the homeland, but we have to arrange that in terms of how we're gonna keep Israel as an expression of self-determination of the Jewish people. In the same time, we have to keep the Palestine as an Arab democratic state, Palestinian state, and still yet it can have a minority of Jewish people who live inside the independent and sovereign Palestinian state. This is enlarge our vision.
As I understand it, you talk about two independent states within the homeland, the combination of the two, and you're looking at what were the 1967 borders. Now, as you just mentioned, Dr. Thabet, you said it's about 72 years ago, the whole area was known as Palestine. How do the Palestinian people feel about accepting the 1967 borders now?
Well, you know, until recently, the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians accept the compromise of splitting the homeland into independent sovereign states. This is including the Palestinian Authority, okay? All polls, okay, conducted among Palestinians in the last 10 years just support the idea of two-state solution. Now, following the annexation or deal of the century, yes, there is a new ideas why we have to go for the two-state solution. However, we are trying to upgrade the two-state solution actually. The traditional two-state solution is not talking about a free movement. The principal thing in the two-state solution, the idea of we are here and they are there. Who are we and who are there? Well, look at me. I am a Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel. My family live in Gaza Strip. Part of my family members live in Jericho and in Hebron. So I am throughout the homeland, okay? I have the right to move freely in the homeland. I am demanding the same right for the Jewish people who live in the homeland. They can live in Tel Aviv and they can move to live in Hebron or in Jericho or other places. This is the principal thing in our vision. I still believe that the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians support the upgrading the two-state solution, as we are suggesting that in the two states, one homeland.
Meron, turning to you and just thinking about the Jewish people who live in enclaves with walls, as we've seen on the news, you must have spoken to these people. They might say the walls are there to protect them for their safety. How can you break down these walls to get to a point where people trust one another for their own safety and the safety of their family?
Well, of course, it's a huge question. And you have to remember that in the Israeli Jewish mind, it's not started only after 67 or after the building of the separation wall in the early 2000s. 2002. You go back to the roots of Zionism. Jewish communities separated themselves based on Jewish work, Jewish labor. So the idea of separation is very inherent to the Jewish Israeli thinking. So yes, there is a big challenge, a huge challenge for us Jews in this land to get out of this mentality of being behind walls and to open up to the environment, either the very near environment. The Thabet is living in Kalansoa, 40 kilometers from Tel Aviv. So it's a very close environment, or either the environment in Jerusalem or in the West Bank or in Gaza. So yes, there is here a challenge, but I think that if we want a future in this land, we Jews, and I'm talking now about Jews, if we want a future in this land, we will have to accept that there is another people living on this land, and that this people, in large term, not the people only as a nation, they deserve the same rights as we. And until they will not have their full rights and their self-respect and their freedom, we will not be free. We Jews will not be free in this land. So I think it's a long process, but I do see, the early signs of such understanding. We see now, for example, inside Israel, after we had 3 rounds of elections, 2019, 2020, and there is a new awareness, for example, among Israeli more liberal Jews inside Israel, that partnership with the Palestinian minority inside Israel is necessary for their survival, for their democratic survival. So there is new understanding among the Jews that we need to live together in equal rights and freedom for all and mutual respect. It's not easy. We are the dominant part. But things happen sometimes very quickly. I was head of the foreign news department in a small paper that doesn't exist anymore, Hadashot. I got the job in 1989. There was still the wall of Berlin and apartheid regime in South Africa. 2 years later, I was out of this job and there was no wall in Berlin and Mandela was free. And nobody expected that it will happen. So huge changes happen sometimes, even when everyone is sure that they will never happen.
You're optimistic.
Yes.
Well, that's good. And actually, just thinking about this, huge changes can happen seemingly quite suddenly, but behind the scenes, there can be years of grassroots pushing towards that apparent sudden change. And thinking about the burgeoning grassroots organizations which you speak about, for many years there have been joint orchestras, for example, bilingual schools. We have doctors working together in the hospitals. There does seem to be a growing number of grassroots organizations between Israelis and Palestinians, from what I can see, not living there on the ground. So I'd like to ask you both about this, and also, how do you make yourself as a grassroots organization stand out?
As already you mentioned, Lisa, I'm a co-executive director of the Abraham Initiatives. It's actually an advocacy NGO, works to promote equality and inclusion between Palestinian Arabs inside Israel and Jewish citizens. And yes, it's tough to work in Israel in this toxic, political toxic environment, I would say, but still we are really making difference in the life of people. We have different programs, especially in the education, joint learning, shared learning program, for example, talking with the Israeli, teaching the Israeli journalists Arabic language and culture and so forth. We see that, more and more people in Israel realizing that the need to work together and to give hope for both people. Well, yes, we have a real challenge here, which is the leadership. the Israeli and Palestinian leadership can do better job, especially the Israeli leadership, okay? Especially the leadership, who's the stronger partner here, and that he is going in different, I'm talking about Netanyahu, is going in different direction. So all in all, people understand that without peace, without compromise, without respect to the other people, it's not gonna work. Yes, I think that the annexation, the NGOs in Israel, most of the NGOs really working in the grassroots level, they understand that without trying to understand the other side and without the freedom and independent and sovereignty to the other part, it's not going to work. We will continue work, especially in education. Still, we have a lot of challenges, how to convince most of the Israelis and some of the Palestinians. We have a challenge of to try to just to tackle, to cope with the issue of fear. There is a very strong fear discourse within the Israeli society and a lot of politics of fear also, that the political leadership are using that against such great ideas that we are promoting. Again, both Palestinian and Israelis, we are two different groups, okay, working together. There is an active group in Palestine, an active group in Israel. Meron and I, we have different nationalities, but we are in the same group, trying to convince our people, Israelis, Palestinians inside Israel, to try to promote together such a vision that it's a new, it's kind of not only giving a hope for both people, it's out of the box thinking that we have to try it. We have to try something new, okay? It's a comprehensive vision, okay? It's talking about things that people trying to promote, trying to delay, the issue of Jerusalem, the issue of Palestinian refugees, the issue of settlers, okay? We are actually offering solutions for such issues.
I would say, first of all, Dr. Thabet referred to it, that we have now, for example, the challenge of COVID-19. And it's interesting that during this time, the fact that there was a huge change, and there are so many Arab doctors today in all and every hospital that you come in, you encounter Arab doctors or Arab medical workers. And I think it made a difference during this time, as if we are the same front, if we use military terms. Yes, it's sinking down. And as for our organization, I think we work in, I would say, 3 different directions. One is research and trying to elaborate our vision into more detailed program. We have written an 11-point document 5 years ago. Now we are completing a 15 pages booklet, and we hope to go further and more detailed and more research on how this confederation between 2 independent states will look like. This is one direction. The other direction, I would say, is gathering power. The gathering power, we have done a lot of meetings with the public, in the media, with academics, with politicians, in Israel and Palestine. I think we've met with tens of thousands of people. We have supporters. We have very limited resources up till now, but we have to gather to make a force out of these supporters that understand the crisis of the classical 2-state solution and do not want to go to 1 state. So this is the second direction. And the third direction is education. We have to educate people about a new paradigm. As I told you, it's very rooted in Zionism, the idea of separation. The paradigm of separation is very, very deep. So to change the paradigm of separation to a paradigm of sharing needs a lot of education, and we have to work with organizations. And there are so many organizations. Thabet heads one of the most important ones, but there are other organizations working for joint society inside Israel, working cross-border. We have to give all these organizations that are already working on the ground a vision for the future. And I think a vision in itself, even if it will not be implemented exactly as we now say, having a vision is so important for all this working on the ground, for joint work, joint society inside Israel and between Israel and Palestine.
You've both touched on many subjects in the last 5 minutes or so. Meron, I wanted to turn to you again, actually, if I may, because actually, Thabet, you were talking about Netanyahu. The political leadership, one could say, is not ideal right now. He's under charges of bribery, fraud, breach of trust being a very important word. Now, he's got a couple of cases against him when we think about him wanting favorable coverage from the media. So we're in a situation globally where when you're spreading your messages of education or research, you want people to trust you. You want to placate any inbred hatred over generations. And you want to dismiss any possibility of fake news. So how can you do this, given the leadership that you have in Israel at the moment?
Here is a challenge, I think, that is not special to Israel. This problem of leadership promoting fake news and preventing real discussion and real facts. It starts from the White House and goes to many leaders now in Europe, and also Netanyahu, who's such a good friend with President Trump. So it's a problem, but I think, there's no other option than telling the truth, speaking truthfully to the people. And Thabet said something about we are tackling the most thorny issues. We are not putting aside neither the question of settlements, nor the question of Jerusalem, nor the question of Palestinian refugees. These three in the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. It's too difficult, let's leave it aside. It's too difficult, let's just dismantle the settlement without even thinking, is it possible or not possible? It's not easy to talk about Palestinian refugees because Israeli Jews are afraid, so let's put this question out of discussion. Jerusalem is so complicated, so let's just say Jewish neighborhood to Israel, Palestinian neighborhood to Palestine, without thinking how a city can survive with such divisions. So we are talking about the real issue, going to the roots of the conflict. And I think when you tell the truth and when you don't avoid issues and confront them directly, you get a credit for being honest. And I think in the long run, it would work. I don't know exactly. I gave you before two examples, Berlin Wall and apartheid regime in South Africa. Nobody predicted when it will happen. In retrospect, people say, yes, the Soviet regime was weak. Yes, apartheid regime was weak. But in real time, nobody really thought it is the case. So I don't know when the tip of the iceberg will hit the Titanic. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 10 years. We have to work.
Now, Thabet, just thinking about how this might work, and I think it was Meron earlier who said the one-state solution is not a viable option. So I'd like your thoughts on even just the thought of one state. And the other thing I want to talk about is another complicated subject. It's the economic gap. As you say on your website, you do tackle the thorny questions, and they are big, big questions. There is a huge economic gap between Israel and Palestine. How could that be assuaged, to be made less intense if your idea can come to fruition?
Well, I can tell you we have a set of challenges really, including security issues, economic gaps, other things. But the most important thing is to build a trust and to give a hope for both people. We have to start something new. You know, when I'm thinking that in the last 72 years, since the inception of the State of Israel, Israel moved and occupied Gaza Strip 8 times. And still, are we going to occupy Gaza one more time? So it's not going to help. We have to think out of the box. we have to think, to accept the idea that people, all people in the homeland are equal people regardless of their color or gender or the nationality. If we accept this notion, if we accept this principle, we will give hope actually, and we'll try to build the trust. Now, yes, the Palestinians live under occupation in the last 53 years. We are today, 5th of June actually, tomorrow, 6th of June, we are commemorating 53 years of the occupation, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, okay? And Palestinians couldn't make it, cannot make it really under so many restrictions, under military rule. They cannot really develop neither economy, their even normal life under occupation. And it's obviously known. But I can guarantee you that the Palestinian people are smart people, just like the Jewish people. They are very smart, very organized. If the Palestinians can build states in the Gulf area, they can build their own state, the Palestinian state. All they need, freedom, independence, sovereignty, and some help, some support. When I think about the Palestinian diaspora around the world, it's just, there is a lot of similarities between the Jewish diaspora and the Palestinian diaspora. Can you imagine in Chile, South America, 500,000 Palestinians living there, okay? Almost 500,000. Some people, they are businessmen. There are some Palestinians who reached a position of president in some of Central American countries. So it can happen. All we want is just peace, a hope, to start a process, and things will be changed. I know there is a lot of fear. I know there is a lot of mistrust in both sides, but if we start a process that really rely on our principles, in the end of it, we will reach 2 states, independent sovereign states with free movement, without making any injustice to people. You know, one of our principles in our vision, actually, we are talking, injustice should not be corrected by doing injustice to somebody else. We are not going to evacuate people from their homes. We don't think, well, yes, we are saying that, for example, settlements are illegal. Now it's illegal under Israeli occupation of the territories, it's illegal. But believe me, if there is just a peace process, we just start and accepting our principles, we can solve all of these problems. We are offering, suggesting several joint committees to work together to solve basic problems such as security. How are we gonna manage your Jerusalem, for example? Nobody can manage your Jerusalem by itself. Jerusalem can be one city, united city, a capital for 2 states, okay? And with a free movement, and can manage together by Israelis and Palestinians together. All in all, I would like to say, yes, there is a gap between Palestinian, especially economic gap, but I don't think that Palestinians cannot overcome these gaps if they have the opportunity.
Dr. Thabet, I just wanted to come back to you on a couple of these points. Do you feel that one state is impossible? And I ask this because actually another thing you say on your website, you give the example of Belgium, in fact, and the French-speaking, the Flemish-speaking communities living together. So I know we're jumping beyond what's even potentially possible, the 2-state solution. You repeat the example of Jerusalem.
We need a stage of self-determination for both people to overcome so many challenges, so many years of animosity between Israelis and Palestinians. It's not gonna help. You know, I am a Palestinian, citizen of the State of Israel. I'm discriminated against. We didn't solve even our problems inside Israel, okay? Which becoming more Jewish state on the expense of its democratic values. I am not against one-state solution in principle. You know what? I would like to leave that for the following generations. Maybe a new generation of Jews and Palestinians will conclude one day that we need one state, which is fine, but not now. Now we have 2 independent and sovereign states, self-determination for Jewish people. We know the history of the Jewish people. We know it's the outcomes of the Holocaust. We know what happened with the Palestinians in 1948 during the Nakba. We have to pass this stage. This stage can take 40 years, 60 years, 100 years. I will leave it for the coming generations.
And another thing you mentioned, Dr. Thabet, is the Palestinian diaspora. And when I lived in other places, I met some of these. And one thing that struck me was passports. They wanted to get a passport from somewhere else. So I met Palestinian people, mothers-to-be, who flew to Canada, for example, to have their babies there so they could get Canadian passports for their children, and other examples in other countries. I imagine when you talk about self-determination, you also need the strength and the worth of the Palestinian passport to increase.
Yeah, no doubt. The Palestinians really found in very tough position. They are living between, in terms of passports, between the rock and the hard place. It's between Israeli rock, well, it's the homeland of Palestinians that they cannot really enter Palestine freely. They have to pass either through Jordan. They cannot even come by airplane through Israel. The rock of Israel and the hardy place of the Arab countries that they are really depriving Palestinians of free movement also. And with a lot of restrictions. Just think about Lebanon, what's going on. So the Palestinians see the European countries is really an exit for, it can be a lot of help in terms of passport. This is why they are looking for dual citizenship. They want the Western citizenship, one of the Western countries, but still they don't forget Palestine. They still have a lot of connection with Palestine. It's the same thing, with some similarities with the Jewish people. So many Jewish Israelis have dual citizenship now. Israelis with American passport, or European passport, and so forth. It seems to us that also the world is changing, and all people are, if they have the chance for two passports, will go for it. If you ask me, I have an Israeli passport. I would love to have a permanent Palestinian passport too. But my people still, they don't have their free and independent state. When I wanted to travel with my wife to Malaysia to attend a conference there, and Malaysia doesn't have political ties, connections with Israel, I asked the Palestinian Authority and got a Palestinian passport for 1 year only, okay? So I have a permanent Israeli passport and a temporarily Palestinian passport. I would love to have a dual citizenship too.
I think that's another thing you can add to your list of statement of principles, which is outlined on the website as well. It's a wonderful.
Well, I would love to offer Meron Palestinian passport too. Why not? Instead of looking for German passport or Hungarian passport, well, both we can have Palestinian and Israeli passport. Just think, we have to dream.
Well, Thabet, you did also mention, both of you actually mentioned neighboring states, and we can see what's happening in Lebanon at the moment. It's on the brink of an almighty recession. And just thinking about the states around you, the neighboring countries, and Meron, earlier in this conversation, you also mentioned the COVID crisis, which has come left field and perhaps changed things more quickly than one would imagine in many different ways, with the Arab doctors working side by side with Israeli doctors. Do you think, Meron, that Palestinians and Israelis could work together more easily than the help they might get from the neighboring countries or the global community?
Yes, I think so. I attended several, international gathering of journalists and other, and there were a few cases in which, there was a Egyptian delegation, Jordanian delegation, other delegation, and then an Israeli delegation and a Palestinian one. And in breakfast, always, it's a rule, the Palestinians sat with the Israelis, and vice versa, of course. Because we maybe hate each other, not all of us, of course, me and Thabet do not hate each other, but Israelis pretend that they hate Arabs and vice versa, but we are close. And I think there is a huge potential for Israeli-Palestinian cooperation and sharing that will go really to the Middle East, to the neighboring countries, and say, listen, we are working together. We have reconciled with each other. I think it will be a huge power for the Middle East, Because, you know, there was quite today not very liked phrase by Shimon Peres, by the late Shimon Peres, talking about a new Middle East. But then the idea he had of this new Middle East is Israeli power, economic power taking over the Middle East. That was how it was conceived. But if we will have a partnership between Israelis and Palestinians, as Dr. Thabet said, the Palestinians are the most educated people in the Middle East with the Jews, with the Israeli Jews, but generally speaking, they are the most educated people in the Middle East. So I think there is here a huge potential of working together, of people who know each other, even if they met to unfortunate circumstances, but now they know each other and can work together and have some common culture and have some common even values and work together with the Middle East. One of the models we have, I'm not saying the only one, but one of the models we have is the EU. Started from, as you know, countries that fought each other, 2 world wars, 10 of millions of people killed, and then established a cooperation, a joint superstructure that turns into the EU that we know now. Now, it started from those who made really the wars, and then, you know, it spread out. Will this cooperate for the confederation that we want between Israel and Palestine will spread out? I hope so. I think it has a potential to spread out to Jordan, maybe to Lebanon, even Syria. It seems very far now, but when the EU was started, who would imagine that Poland or Lithuania will be part of the EU? I don't think no sane people thought that it is possible, but it is now part of the EU with all the problems that the EU had. And it has a lot of problems, so we are not copying anything. But it's an option that we bear in mind.
You paint such a beautifully optimistic and hopeful picture, vision, as you said earlier, for the future. Something that I'm aware of because I've read about it a little bit and it worries me just as an individual is that when a child is raised in an area of conflict and war and hasn't got another option for their little brains, their developing brains, apparently there is some scientific research that shows it can have a genetic impact that goes down through the lines. So you're not just fighting lack of trust or geographical separation, you're fighting a conflict that can literally genetically alter the poor children who through no choice of their own are born into this. How do you overcome all of this?
I can tell you that you're right. We just look to what's going on right now in Gaza Strip. People under siege, okay, in refugee camps. 80% of the people under poverty line. People not working, there is no real economy there. And people just, all they witness is just sometimes firing from Israel or firing from Hamas to Israel and living under dictatorship regime of Hamas. How kids can grow up in such conditions, okay? As Meron mentioned, solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the gate for normalization of life in the Middle East. And when I'm talking about normalization, it's not only necessary between Israel and the Arab countries. I'm talking about normalization of life, normalization between people. Well, I'm really differentiate between regimes, Arab regimes and Israeli regime, and the masses in the Middle East, between Israelis and Arab and non-Arabs in the Middle East too, okay? Turkish, Iranians, and others. We have to knock on the door, open the gate, make peace, Israeli-Palestinian peace, and then we can reach out to the masses. What we are witnessing right now of warming relationship between dictatorship regimes and Israel, between corrupted regimes, the Israeli regime and the Gulf State regime, Saudi, it's not convincing, okay? It's gonna be for short time only. We have to educate for peace. We have to educate for shared society, share the future in the Middle East. and we have to do it in grassroots level, okay? So to do it in grassroots level, it's parallel to improve life of people, okay? In all countries, okay? Not only in Gaza and the West Bank, it's inside Israel, in the Gulf States country, in Egypt, in Jordan. Well, I can tell you that the situation in Arab countries is really bad. We are actually, most of the Arab countries, if not all of them, are controlled by dictatorship regimes. And it's a real problem. I'm afraid that the Israeli regime is deteriorating to that direction. Yes, there is free election in Israel, but if you witness what's going on in Israel during the last 3 months, the emergency regime, because of the COVID-19 crisis, I see there is some similarities with some dictatorship regimes. And we have to cope with this situation. We have to be against this situation. Again, we have to suggest hope to the Gazans, to the people of Jerusalem, of Jenin in the West Bank, but also to the Israelis, Jewish Israelis in Sderot, in Tel Aviv, and in Haifa.
And Lisa, I have previous information that you are from Irish origin. So I think Ireland is also an example. Northern Ireland, you know, yes, people were brought on without any trust in the other community, on hate, on vengeance. Yes, people were brought up on this culture for decades, if not centuries. And then the Good Friday Agreement, yes, people did not become, you know, lovers the next day. No, we are not talking about this. It's not, you know, we're not in the 60s, peace and love. No, but still the profits of third rule in Northern Ireland between two conflicting ethnic groups has, first of all, stopped violence, and slowly, you know better than me, but I think it's slowly moving towards a culture of coexistence, at least, of peaceful coexistence. And we see now, you know, with Brexit, how the loyalists in Northern Ireland want to keep the connection, the open border with the Republic of Ireland, which was once the border conflict and war. So things are changing, the political, so therefore I think, yes, it's very important to educate and to show people that there are new opportunities, but it's very important, this is also what we do in the Land for All, is also to portray the outlines, at least, of the political agreement, which could in its turn generate more confidence and start a process of reconciliation. So working in education, in meeting people, talking, very important. Without this, nothing can happen.
Meron, you touched on something very close to my heart there. I was a child in Ireland. I was brought up in the south of Ireland. And as a child, I was never allowed to visit Northern Ireland because it was deemed too unsafe. My father, as a hobby, was a bagpipe player, and he would do competitions all across the whole country of Ireland. And yet, to this day, I have visited Israel, I've sung in Israel, I've visited Palestine. I still haven't been to Northern Ireland, so I must go. I've lived in London a long time. I must go to Northern Ireland. So yes, you're absolutely right. And we are all so happy that there is a peace there now and a safety and a connection. But just coming back to some final words from you both. You've given us many examples across Europe and other parts of the world where seemingly suddenly this peace switch flipped. It has to come from the grassroots, but then leadership also has to take it by the mantle and go with it, hold that torch and make it happen. So, Dr. Thabet, do you think you'll see a peace within the homeland with these two states in your lifetime?
Yes, I believe, I'm sure we can have it if we have really brave and clever leadership in both sides, especially in the Israeli side. We can learn from the experience of other nations, other countries. What we are suggesting is very similar to the European model. You know, I would like to remind you that 80 years ago, France and Germany were a lot enemies, really. They destroy each other. Just think about the reality today, see the connection, see the relationship, free movement between two independent and sovereign states, that they are talking different languages, sometimes even different culture, I would say, but still they can manage to work together politically, economy, and think together globally. And why we cannot do it? I believe that the Israelis, most of the Palestinians, they want peace. They want to live in peace, okay? All we want is just to convince, to have, first of all, a leadership that really think about peace, think about out of the box, okay? Come up with something new and let the people be free, equal, and just to solve problems in just way, to give freedom for everybody in this homeland. It's the Holy Land. It must live in peace. Well, peace will prevail not only not outside of the Middle East, also in the Middle East, in Palestine, in Israel. I understand that we are passing through very tough times, especially in this region, not only in Palestine, Israel, but in this region. But who knows that very soon we will have, people will realize that peace is the right thing, right to try to do.
And Meron, the final word to you. Is peace possible in your homeland in your lifetime?
I don't know how many years I will live, but yes, I think so. I think it's closer than we can imagine. I think that even, and we didn't talk about it and we will not go into it too much now, I think even the annexation idea is bringing Israel into a crisis, into a real crisis. It portrays, it institutionalizes apartheid. Something that I think even many in the Israeli society will not accept, and certainly not outside of Israel. So it's bringing Israel to the brink, I think. And when you come to the brink, I'm not Leninist, you know, and hope for the worst in order that it will be better. But I think when you come to the brink, maybe you are closer to the solution. And if we come back to the South Africa, I remember talking to a journalist who spent 10 years in South Africa in the last years of the apartheid regime, and then went to Israel, Palestine. And he told me that right before apartheid fell, there was a record number of restrictions on Black people. So it reached the highest level just before it fell. So I think, yes, Israel is coming to the brink. It cannot go on like this for a long time. And I think it's not that far. But I would not like to be disappointed.
Thank you both for such a wonderfully engaging conversation over many very difficult subjects, but with people like you and your organization and others like it at the helm, I feel I can leave this conversation optimistic in the hope that one day I'll be able to visit both of your sovereign states.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.